Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, and I never get tired of saying it because it's genuinely my favorite book. I think that's a fair conceit for an author, that this is the book that is the most attuned to my desires in a book. This is the book I most wanted to write. It's a book I still enjoy reading to this day or listening to the audiobook. My wife was making fun of me because the audiobook is narrated by the exquisite David Radke, wonderful narrator. And I was listening to it, and we were coming to a stop. And I was, by the way, I was doing research because I'm finishing Banneker Bones' third adventure. So I went back and I was listening to it, and I had to stop the audiobook because we'd arrived at our destination. I was just kind of disappointed, and she's just staring at me like, you know how it ends. If there's one book you've read more than any other book, you know this one. I know, but I still enjoy it. So if you're curious about an 11-year-old biracial boy detective and his cousin Ellicott Spellworth who fly around on jetpacks and blast giant robot bees out of the Latimer City sky with EMP blast rifles, the first book, Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, is available as a paperback, an audiobook, and the ebook is free. Free to download whenever you're listening or watching to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. Once you're hooked on the series, check out Banneker Bones and the Alligator People and the upcoming third Banneker Bones adventure, which I'll be talking about more in 2020, under the super secret pen name Robert Kent. I've written some horror stories, such as the young adult novel All Together Now a Zombie Story, which is about teens in crisis. I love zombies because they're just a wonderfully malleable metaphor for all the different maladies that can befall mankind, from a plague. You've got your plague element, you've got your element of what if society begins to collapse and fall apart, to the fact that inevitably we're all going to die, and we're literally seeing that truth coming at us in slow shambling form. I love zombies. If I find out that an author I admire has a zombie book, I have yet to read too many zombie stories, that's for sure. The book of theirs I'm likely to take a peek at before I'm done. So check out All Together Now, a zombie story. If you want to go for the extreme adult horror of, say, a Stephen King, check out my 5-volume horror series, The Book of David. If you're curious about that, it's about an atheist that buys a haunted house that then begins to give him religious visions involving flying saucers. So it is as crazy as it sounds, and it just gets crazier the longer you read it. I pitch this book on a regular basis, and I can't even tell you about what happens in Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. It is just nuts. So check out The Book of David. If you're curious about that one, The Book of David, Chapter 1 by Robert Kent, not Rob Kent, is available to download for free whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. As always, keep up with what's going on with the show at middlegradeninja.com. Next Saturday, I'm going to be here chatting with somebody fascinating. Depending on when we record shows, that will depend on who that person's going to be. But if you check with middlegradeninja.com, you're going to see who I'm talking with, what conversations are scheduled, know who's coming up on the show. You can also read interviews with hundreds of literary agents, editors, publishing professionals, and my favorite people in the world, authors. So you can check all of those folks out as well. Today, I couldn't be more excited. I am sitting down with Jennifer Voigt Kaplan, and we're going to be talking about her new book, Crushing the Red Flowers. Did I say that right? Is it Kaplan or Kaplan?
Kaplan.
Kaplan. Sorry about that, Jennifer. Jennifer, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for clearing the time. This is launch week as we're talking. So I know you've got to be running around just like a writer who just launched a book.
Exactly.
How is your launch week going?
So far, so good. We launched just a couple days ago on Tuesday, and I have my launch party coming this Saturday.
Oh, very exciting. Where's your launch party going to be held?
In Madison, New Jersey, at the Short Stories bookstore, 3:00.
And what sort of exciting events do you have planned for the party?
Well, we have a number of giveaways. We'll have an author Q&A, of course, some delicious German-themed foods, and a book signing.
Fantastic. And of course, I assume everyone that's ever known or loved you will be there and saying, oh, Jennifer, we're so proud of you. This is such a momentous occasion.
It is wonderful to have your friends and family support you as a debut novelist.
I went to a launch party. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and say her name. She won't mind. Annie Sullivan, previous guest. If you haven't listened to her episode, esteemed audience, go back and check it out. It's a wonderful episode. I went to her launch party for Tiger Queen, and it was bigger than a lot of the weddings I've been to. It was just tremendous.
Fantastic.
So since I'm talking to you here at Launch Week, what for all the authors out there who yearn to be where you are now at the launch of their book, what all has gone into planning this week, and what all do you have before you?
Well, there's been quite a lot of planning. There's between the time an author gets his or her contract and release, the amount of stuff going on, it could be a full-time job. And, the marketing, the PR, the organization of it all really takes a lot of time. So quite a lot of stuff has gone on and will continue to go on.
Sure. That'll keep you busy. And then eventually, I suppose you might want to sit down and get back to writing at some point.
Oh, yeah, my happy place. Yes.
During the launch of a book, is that even a consideration? I'm going to write this week, or do you say, nope, this week I'm going to launch and then maybe I'll get back to it next week?
I've consciously and unconsciously have kept writing. Truly is my happy place. When I have something wonderful going on in my life, how do I celebrate? I take an hour and I write. If I have something sad going on in my life, I take an hour and I write, and it makes me feel better. So I view writing as a treat almost. So yes. So during my actual launch day, which was 2 days ago, I treated myself. It was my celebratory, figurative glass of champagne. I treated myself, even though I was super busy and had plenty of things to do. I wanted to take the time and just celebrate, and I wrote, and it made me happy.
Anything in particular, or just something that spoke to you at that moment that I want to write this just for my own pleasure?
Well, I'm always puttering around with a few novel ideas.
So if I'm talking to you and it's not launch week, what does your usual writing schedule look like?
So in an ideal world, and of course this is difficult, I do have 3 children, school-aged children. I have a family. I do a lot of volunteer work in my town, but what I would love to carve out is 2 hours a day of writing. And perhaps now with the book coming out, 1 hour a day of marketing activities. That would be ideal if I could maintain that schedule every day, 5 days a week.
So 1 hour, I know can be extremely useful for somebody that's on it, that's disciplined, that comes in and like, we're doing this.
Yeah.
For me, an hour is I've stared off and written maybe 30 to 40 minutes of that hour. How do you maximize that hour if you're only going to get one in for the day?
For marketing activities?
Oh, well, for both.
Okay, so for writing, I do not write at home. I go to coffee shops and I unplug my phone, I unplug my internet, and just being out of the house really allows me to focus. The background noise is good for me. I can really, get into the swing of things. For the marketing activities, I have to sit at my desk because I have my files, I have, everything that I need at my desk. So I have to, that's more of a conscious and deliberate form of concentration. I have to, sometimes I'll set a timer, I'll look at the clock and I say, okay, 20 minutes for this marketing activity, no checking email, don't get distracted by anything else. So I usually assign time to it.
Gotcha. Do you listen to music while you write, or just the ambient noise going on around you?
No music. That I can't write if I listen to music. It's completely distracting. Usually when I hear a song, it brings me back to a particular time and place, particular memories or ideas. And if I'm not writing within that scope, that is distracting to me.
Gotcha. So when, and we'll get back to marketing, but when do you do, I assume your research is not part of that hour of writing?
So a good amount of research went into Crushing the Red Flowers. It's a historical fiction novel. And no, that's a great question. And that was really a separate undertaking. If you asked me this, a few years ago before I had the book deal, I wasn't doing much. I wasn't giving much time to marketing initiatives. But I was giving a lot of time to research, and I can go into that now if you'd like, or...
It's our conversation. We can go anywhere you want.
Okay. So if you're not familiar with my book, Crushing the Red Flowers, it's an upper middle grade historical novel. And it is really about two ordinary boys in 1938 Germany dealing with the extraordinary circumstances of Kristallnacht. I use two main characters, a German Jewish boy named Emil and a German boy named Friedrich, who's in the Hitler Youth. Actually, the Hitler Jungvolk, which is the younger version of the Hitler Youth. And I wrote this book because my heritage is half German and half German Jewish. So I grew up with a lot of fascinating stories about this time period. All of my family, up until 1938, both sides of my family were in Germany. So they lived through this time. So I think my novel really started from just a basic, hearing lots of these rich, wonderful, nuanced stories from my family. That was the springboard of my research. Once I decided to actually commit and write the novel, I conducted formal interviews. I was fortunate enough at the time, I still had 4 members of my family who were still with us, who lived through this time period. So that was a springboard. And then beyond that, even just at a basic level, I just started to read everything. I read adult fiction, juvenile fiction about this time period, academic articles, nonfiction. I watched a lot of movies so I can understand the mood and the style. And then that laid the foundation for me. And then pretty early on, I really became committed to making the book as historically accurate as possible. And so I had phoned Patricia Herber-Rice. She's with the Holocaust Memorial Museum, and she had advised me on a few very specific historical questions. And she actually offered or connected me with Myrna Goldenberg with Montgomery College, who was able to, read the manuscript and really vet it for historical accuracy. So, but beyond that, I had many questions. I'll try not to give away any spoilers. But so, for instance, a lot of the novel takes place around a river, the Leine River, running through Hanover. And I needed to know what kind of fish species were in that river. I needed to confirm the fish species. So, I went off and I, did my research into that. Early on in the scene, I wanted to describe the wallpaper in one of the characters' rooms. I had no idea what the wallpaper looked like. I asked my family. They couldn't remember what their wallpaper looked like. So I hopped on the train to New York, and I went to the New York Public Library picture collection, and I just browsed through everything I could about that time period in Germany, just to get an understanding of what kind of wallpaper was common in houses at that time. So every little research question I had sent me on a tangent, and it was a good amount of time.
So, devil's advocate question that I'm asking, because I'm horrified to hear myself ask it, but I know folks listening might be thinking it. If you're writing your novel, the story is gripping, you've got the broad strokes all correct, everything lines up with history, but you're wrong about the fish in the river, or you're wrong about the wallpaper. Does that create an irreconcilable issue for the reader? Is the novel that much poor, or is it just simply that satisfaction that you know the fish were the wrong kind of fish?
Okay, that's a bigger question. I can speak for my novel, but that's quite a broad question that people...
No, I want you to speak for all authors everywhere of all time. No, just for you, just for Crushing the Red Flowers.
So for me, I felt as though I was covering a very, very important topic. Kristallnacht really hasn't been covered that much in middle grade literature, and I wanted to get it right. I really wanted to get it right for the children. I didn't want to give them something not factually accurate. So I did the best I could. Hopefully I accomplished this goal. I think if you're presenting a historical novel to children and you present it as accurate, you should go the extra mile. If you present it as, this is sort of tongue in cheek, or there may be some wiggle room, I think that's fine as well. But I do think, as tempting as it is, as a writer, you become exhausted at times. You become exhausted emotionally with your craft, with the topic. And, you want everything to be wonderful and you want to be done. And it's tempting, I can imagine, to not want to take that extra step and spend the entire day at the New York Public Library picture collection looking for pictures of wallpaper. But for me, this was just something important. And if I find it important, I won't cut corners.
Excellent. That is, I don't know what they call that, a gauntlet, where somebody asks you a question that has a little bit of a trap in there. You sailed right through it. I 100% believe your enthusiasm. So how long did this novel take you to write? We're talking launch week. How long ago did you officially say, okay, I think I'm going to write a novel about this history?
Okay, so it took a long time. Even by publishing standards, it took a long time. And for me, it was okay. I had started, I don't have a traditional background as a writer, and I sort of fell into writing when my kids were little, maybe around 2008, 2009. And I puttered around a little bit with picture book writing, and it was the first time I even considered writing fiction, and it was such a wonderful experience. I wrote a few books. They were god-awful. I wrote a few, but it was just so fulfilling, and it was just such a wonderful creative outlet. And I was, getting so much inspiration from my own children that I started to attend conferences. I eventually hooked up with a critique group. I did want to improve my craft because it gave me and still gives me so much joy. So, I puttered around with picture books for a couple of years, and that was wonderful. And then, it just was a natural progression for me to think about my own family history and all the stories that were told around me, and to want to sort of aggregate this all and write a novel. So probably I thought of the idea around 2009, and I really committed to it around 2010. And it wasn't until 2015 that I started subbing out to agents. So it took 5 years, which was okay. In that time, I taught myself how to write a novel. As I just mentioned, my only background was with picture books. And that was okay. I would, take time out for conferences, and I would read how-to books, and I would, watch craft videos. There's a huge emotional element when you write about a difficult emotional topic, and that's compounded if it's your own family. So, I would conduct interviews with my family, and I could tell, sometimes members would get visibly upset. And then later, as I stewed on the information and tried to make sense of it, it's upsetting for me. So I would have to step back sometimes and take emotional breaks. And then I, could return to it, with a fresh set of eyes. So it took a while, but I was comfortable with the journey because, I didn't want to cut corners with my research. I didn't want to cut corners with craft. I knew I was learning the business of writing as I was writing it. So, I hope future novels won't take me 5 years. I don't think they will, but it's okay. And it was enjoyable, the amount of time that I spent on this one.
Lots of questions to unpack there. Let's start with these interviews. When you go in to interview a family member, or anybody, are you sitting down and putting like a tape recorder between you? Are you putting up a camera? Are you just taking notes? What's your approach?
Okay, so when I first started, I had 2 family members in this country, and I didn't use a tape recorder. I had a wealth of knowledge just from growing up with these 2 family members. They are my maternal grandparents, and I grew up with them. So I already had a good, solid basis of information going into the start of the writing process. So no, I didn't use a tape recorder. I took notes, and then I verified and validated the information that they told me. Both of my grandparents actually in the 90s were interviewed for the Shell Foundation, which documents Holocaust survivors. And so just the basics of, some of their important memories, where they lived, information about professions, that was already documented in video form, not by me, but, 10 years before me. The other two members of my family are my paternal side, my aunt and uncle, who don't speak a lick of English, and they were in Germany at the time. So what I would do when I would see them, I'm able to communicate a little bit. My German language skills aren't so great nowadays. But how I really got most of the information, I would type out my questions and I would give it to them. And they love talking about history. I think, my uncle in particular, he just enjoys talking about his own experiences. He enjoys, thinking about history. And so he would type out his answers. And then my sister, who has much better German language skills than I do, would help me translate it.
So I assume she's thanked profusely in the acknowledgements.
And she'll be at
the launch party, and you can hold up her hand and say, "Thank God."
Oh, my wonderful sister, Jessica Myers. She's amazing.
And so you were supplying written questions, and then they were recording themselves to get back to you, or talking to you in person for the German interviews?
They would write it out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then maybe I'd follow up with when I would see them, I'd follow up with a question or two in person.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then over 5 years, how long did it take you to get to a first draft? Because I assume first draft is just a starting place.
Oh my. That it was just such a fluid experience over those 5 years. I can't recall exactly when that happened, but by 2015, I was subbing out to agents.
Gotcha. And so when did you always envision this as a middle grade novel, or did you ever think maybe I could take an adult's perspective on this, or did you have a clear understanding of what your plot would be from the start?
That's a great question. I did some research, and there are some wonderful juvenile fiction books about the period. The majority of them cover the war years. There wasn't that much available that covered the pre-war years, and especially 1938, and especially Kristallnacht, which was just so important. It's such an important year. You stand in 1938 and you can look back and you kind of see how things built up to then, and then you look forward and you see what will come next. So I think it was probably a combination how I came to this. Number one, I felt a need for it. Number two, I wanted to do middle grade, and keeping the story confined to Kristallnacht in 1938 seemed appropriate for that age group. Again, there's some wonderful books that exist that cover the later years. They can be a little intense for the younger children. So the other thing I wanted to do was they're growing up. I often receive questions like, I hear questions like, oh, how could this have happened? Why didn't your family do this? Why didn't your family do that? And there's just there's temptation to categorize and compartmentalize the whole era and say, okay, this entire race of people is bad. This entire race of people are victims. And there's a million different perspectives, and there's a lot of nuanced information leading up to that, and I wanted to capture it, and I wanted to humanize that whole experience. I also think that I wanted to focus on middle grade, probably because of the age of my own family members were roughly tweens and teens during that period. So I had probably, as I'm thinking of 1938 and I'm thinking of my grandmother hiding in the woods during Kristallnacht, she was about 12 at that time. So I think I had an image of that age group during that time already in my head.
Gotcha. So that was always going to be, I gotcha. Follow-up question to that then. When you're composing a fictional narrative, because this isn't a biography, how do you weigh the need to tell your family's story, tell what's important to you personally? Yeah. How do you balance that against creating a fictional narrative that's going to be larger and going to explore the themes that you want to explore? That's,
again, a great question. And I think along the way, I was fortunate. I was able to ask my relatives, and I made it really clear this isn't going to be, a biography about anybody. This isn't going to be nonfiction. This is fictionalized. And, I would tell them what kind of plot turns it was taking. I even helped them. At one point, I was stuck on a plot point. I even asked them, well, what do you suggest? And they got into, they got really into having a creative session with me. And they were just so supportive. So I think just a lot of interaction throughout the entire process with my family members, gave me confidence. Everybody was excited. Everybody was comfortable with the direction that I was taking.
Gotcha. So you made sure they were on board, and so there's not going to be a moment at the launch party where they said, you didn't understand anything we said. This is terrible.
Oh, my goodness. No.
And something I try not to do and fail at miserably on a regular basis, as regular esteemed audience members can attest to, is I try to avoid politics. One, because they move so fast. We talk about it this week. By the time people listen to this, just because an episode goes live doesn't mean people listen to it right away. People are still discovering previous episodes as we're recording this one. So I try to avoid politics, one, because I want people to have a respite from what's going on, the bombardment of politics everywhere else. And two, just because the scandals move so fast that if we're talking about this, by the time they're listening to it, there's probably, this is 5 or 6 scandals ago. But we have seen the rise of a racist demagogue in the United States. It's been a popular theme that if you're wondering what would you have done during the rise of Nazism, you're doing it right now with the state of the Republican Party. So that's about as political as I could possibly get. I'll just put that out there. Did that inform your shaping of this novel? Obviously, it's 5 years. There's 5 years to write, and then another 4 years before we're here at launch, right? Do I have the timeline on that right?
Something like that.
So it would have been relatively earlier for the writing, but has that informed the edits, the revisions, I assume that has to inform this a little bit. Just the parallels between the history we're living in right now and the parallels of a 1938 Germany. Or am I way wildly off base? It happens all the time.
Well, even before 2016, I saw parallels. And going back to my comment previously about growing up, I was just constantly asked questions rooted in ignorance. How could this have happened? I don't understand it. All Germans are evil. All Jewish people are victims. That kind of narrative. And I think it's easy. It makes you feel better drawing a line and separating yourself from that time period because it was so horrific. And point your finger and say, no, that could never happen. There was a reason for that. It's so far out. It's so long ago. It could just never happen. And growing up, I grew up with that mentality. And it's, if you just looked around, even before recent years, you could see things bubbling up that had disturbing parallels to early 1930s Germany. I think, as I was doing research for the book, I didn't just confine it to 1938. I looked, all the way back, throughout the rise of Nazism. And one fascinating bit of research I found was when Adolf Hitler, some of his campaigning speeches were caught on video. And it was fascinating. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was not that. Most of 98% of his campaign promises were rebuilding Germany because, as you know, they were economically devastated, which really helped lead to the rise of Hitler. So, he said, I'm going to rebuild things. We've had enough. We're the victims, all this, this narrative, and just people were so desperate. At the very end, I forgot who came on, but it wasn't Hitler. It was somebody else. And at the very end, it was a footnote about Jewish people and about how, we've had enough. We will no longer be bullied by the Jewish people. And it was fascinating to see it framed in 1930s, when people really, the early 1930s, when people were really starving and ripe for that kind of language. So I think that if you want to make parallels between now and World War II, I don't know if it's fair to look at 1938 and above. I think it would be telling to look at the early 30s, and especially those campaign speeches where it was a little unnerving.
So how do you keep this when you're writing about when you're writing about history that's a little bit darker, but you're obviously still, when you're done writing for the day, you're still here in 2019.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can turn on your Disney Plus or Hulu, whatever. How do you keep that separate, or can you keep from ruining your entire day because you've listened to research from Showa? And how do you overcome that? Because for me personally, when I go back and I look at some of those things, it's like, my God, all of humanity is terrible. What's the point in anything? And then, of course, I have to put that aside. So how do you keep that separate and keep yourself healthy while immersing yourself in that?
Yeah, that goes back to some of the emotional breaks that I needed to take. It did get a little heavy at times. Particular, it's not just a time period. It was, my family, the people who I'm interviewing, my grandparents had to go through this firsthand. It was just, my aunt and uncle, they were on the German side, but their experience throughout the war, it was really, there's a lot of pain in those experiences as well. So I did need to step back and take emotional breaks. Eventually I think I came back to it. The glue that bound it all together was just the wild support of my family. They wanted me to, finish this project. They cheered me on. They were excited about it. They believed in what I was doing. So that was probably, the anchor in all of it.
So the launch will be a celebration of you and your family and everybody that came together and involved to help you get the project.
That's how I see it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's outstanding. And then, how do I follow that up with a question that won't seem trite? Well, let me ask you this: what response? Well, we've talked about. I was going to ask you about your responsibility to history, but I think we've pretty well covered that. Certainly, your responsibility to fish and wallpaper. We've covered in living detail. But you said that you hope that this novel gives young people the courage to question. What do you mean by that? And what specifically would you like them to question?
Well, I'm not going to answer that. So I don't like to be heavy-handed in my writing. If you ask 1,000 people their opinion on a topic, you'll get 1,000 different answers. And probably they all have a thread of truth. So I think if I just spat out my own personal opinion, it would be difficult for children to internalize that and make sense of it. I think if I'm hoping middle grade readers will read the story, see injustices, understand the complications, and then reflect on their own lives. How does this link back to their own lives? Do they see parallels? And, hopefully be able to internalize everything and come to their own decisions.
So what is what tips do you have? I was going to say, what's the secret, but that's too much. Let's say, what tips do you have about writing and guiding young people toward having the types of thoughts that you want them to have without being heavy-handed, without spoon-feeding them? What's the conclusions you're hoping they'll come to?
I try to stay away from answering specific questions. In a way, 1938 lent itself to that, right? Because, I'm not going to answer that because that would give away spoilers to the book.
Fair enough.
But, you have to understand at the time, the characters had no idea what was coming. They really didn't. Nobody could possibly imagine in 1938 it would jump from this to that. And the year definitely saw a lot of drastic changes, but still the slope, I would never in a million years have guessed what the endpoint would have been. So I wrote, or I partnered in writing a really good educational guide, which is included at the end of the book, a discussion guide. And in addition, on my website, you can download a teacher's guide. It's a multi-page teacher's guide tied to the core curriculum. And we, inserted many questions that would hopefully help middle grade readers internalize the content and link it back to their everyday lives.
Gotcha. And so that's something that can be downloaded by all teachers that want to teach this in their classes. When you do something like that, do you get your editor and your publisher involved? Or are you doing that on your own and they say, yeah, okay, that's good? What's the process?
For me, it was the latter. I don't know how, I guess every publishing house is probably different, but for me, it was just, I developed this and, my awesome publisher said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And so, that was that.
Gotcha. And then let's talk a little bit about the process that brought this book out, because it's something that struck me as, what's the word? Just interesting. When I was reading your bio initially, like award-winning children's author's debut novel. Like, how does that work?
Well, there are many writing contests for unpublished novelists. So I submitted to a bunch, and I was very fortunate that this was recognized. I have to tell you, I guess most people will agree with this, but in 2015, when I started subbing it out to agents, the reaction I got was, this is a saturated area. There's no more room. Another Holocaust book, and in some regards, sure, it is crowded, and there have been a million stories, but I insisted, there's been very few stories told over Kristallnacht that are confined to 1938, and from what I know, there's been no stories told over Kristallnacht with two alternating perspectives and points of view.
And certainly none told by you.
Yeah.
Prior to this.
Yeah.
So you get involved in contests. You were recognized in 6 different literary contests before publication. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So, I approached agents and I had this, I received this kind of concern, which is not unfair. And then so simultaneously as I was submitting to agents, I also started submitting to contests. And I found them very helpful. Actually, I submitted to one even before the novel was completed, the SCBWI Work-in-Progress Grant. And I submitted to the multicultural category in 2012. And mind you, this grant has transformed a lot over, the years. Now the rules are a little bit different and the categories are a little bit different. But at the time, there was a multicultural category, and I received the letter of merit from that, which is fantastic. And obviously SCBWI Work-in-Progress Grant, that name has a lot of weight, I think, in the industry with agents and editors. So that caught the attention. And then another wonderful award I submitted to that was really helpful from a few different angles was Publishers Weekly Booklife Prize in fiction. And that is for either self-published or unpublished manuscripts. And I submitted to the middle grade category, and the novel won that category. So it was Taran Matharu submitted a wonderful blurb as part of my prize. I received, fantastic publicity, and I was able to use that and market myself to editors and agents. And even now I'm, able to use it and market myself to the public.
Did you, did you have an agent at that time, or were you still on the query go round while submitting to the contest simultaneously?
I did not have an agent, and I do not have an agent. I have never actually signed with an agent. So agents, I had some wonderful dialogues with a few of them, but it just ultimately never clicked. And then maybe around 2018, 2017, I can't remember the exact date, I started submitting directly to publishers. And then at the end of 2018, I received, an email of interest from IG Publishing, which is where the novel's being published.
Gotcha. So when you come to them and you say, hey, I've already been recognized in 6 literary contests. I've got the Work-in-Progress Grant from the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. Is it just a question of, so go ahead and get your contract, read the book if you have time. Let's do this, right?
Well, not quite.
But then they come back and then so from the time you find the publisher, how long does it take from then until now here we are at launch date?
So I think that's one of the advantages of working with a small press. They're a traditional house and they're an award-winning house, which really attracted me to them. But yeah, so the turnaround time was quite quick. I think I received my offer end of 2018. It was basically by the time the contract was signed, maybe 11 months until my release. And that's amazing.
Yeah, that's writers right now who are listening are pulling their hair out like, what? That's possible?
Yeah, I mean, that's, there's, I'm sure, pros and cons of, working any place. And this was, an absolute pro for me, is just time to market.
I've got a friend that we celebrated the big sale of her book. Well, one of my critique partners that we all helped edit the book, and we celebrated the sale 3 years ago. And I can't wait to get my hands on a copy next year.
Oh my goodness!
So 11 months that's a blessing.
Exactly.
And then let's talk now that the book is out. It's launch time. You've got a degree from the Wharton School of Business and Marketing.
I do.
And I know I'm talking to you here at book 1, so I'll have to circle back and talk to you at book 5 and see how your thoughts on how to market a book have progressed. But what, if you don't mind sharing, what are some of the strategies you're employing? What's the marketing plan of attack?
Wow, that's a big lead-in. So I am a debut novelist. I do have an undergraduate degree in marketing from the Wharton School of Business. There's a lot to learn as a debut novelist that you don't necessarily pick up before you sign your contract. Basics from, developing a website and developing a media kit, which sounds pretty basic, but, all of a sudden you sign the contract, this needs to be done ASAP. So I have spent a lot of time just sort of catching up, I feel like, to the basic level. Going forward, I am really looking forward to finding different pathways to people interested in my book. And that could even be adults in World War II blogs who are interested in World War II fiction. So apparently, I believe it's about 8 states in the United States where it's mandatory to teach the Holocaust in the public schools. So I would like to, market myself to educators in this capacity. I would like to identify Holocaust centers around the country and introduce myself, and perhaps they could sell my book in the Holocaust Center if they do have a shop. So there's a number of areas that I'd like to pursue.
So what's going on with the other 44 states where this isn't mandatory?
I know. Yeah, right.
Get on it. Come on, states. Let's not ignore history. So, okay. So how are you going about the process of approaching them to introduce yourself as, hey, I'm somebody that could be made available to you? How do you make the introduction?
So for the Holocaust centers, this is something I'm in the process of right now. There are lists of Holocaust centers around the United States. So I have acquired my list. And then the step is, it's a little tedious. You need to go, what I do is, I'll go through each and every one and I'll look on the website. I'll see if they have recommended reading lists. I'll see if they have a store. If they don't even have any of that, I'll send an email just to introduce myself and thank them and say, this is what I'm doing. Just FYI, the book exists. I exist. If they do have recommended reading lists, I'll say, please consider, putting my book on the recommended reading list. And if they have a store, I'll, offer an e-arc.
And then I know you're working with a publicist because you're working with Rebecca Gross, whose interview is available now at middlegradeninja.com. What has reaching out and involving a publicist done for you beyond what you can do for yourself?
Okay, so as a debut novelist, I found it extremely valuable. Once again, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what the expectations of the industry are. When do reviews come out? Is this good? Is this bad? I didn't know. So Rebecca was great at hand-holding and sort of guiding me. You really need to have a presence on library thing. You really need to, have a footer in all the emails going out. You really need to get an author Facebook page. Just even guiding me through the basics of what I absolutely needed to do was very valuable to me. She advised me, what kind of giveaways, would be good for me to pursue. She, of course, has, her list of media contacts and reviewers that she, pursued on my behalf. I didn't have the knowledge. There's a million bloggers out there. Some are excellent,
Thank you very kindly.
And some are also good, but they're small. So, as a debut novelist, you don't know what the universe is. So it's nice. It was very nice to have her to navigate through that universe and tell me where to focus my time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And that's one of the frustrating things I know about marketing. That old adage is only half of marketing works. Unfortunately, nobody knows which half. So you got to try a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Heck, I do the podcast and the blog. I'm forever talking about books, and I don't know I couldn't tell you what the exact effect is on sales as a result of doing it, but I assume it's all tremendous. I assume it makes all the difference. So going forward, now that the book is here, and you're going to continue to be marketing, I assume,
yes,
forever for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But at what point is it time to pull back a little bit from focusing on putting this project out there and start to focus on the next project?
I mean, I think any writer should be writing. So that said, sure, I have other projects. I just finished a second novel, not a historical novel. This one is a sci-fi novel, and I'm just beginning to sub it out to agents. Once that's in the works, I have an idea for a new novel, which is just, in the beginning phases of being storyboarded. But I don't think I will ever lose interest in trying to make my historical novel succeed. It's my baby. It's, my debut novel. It's my family heritage. And I find it an important subject matter for children to understand.
So when you step aside from a project that is so deeply personal,
yeah.
And so involved, when you write something like a science fiction novel,
yeah.
Is it harder going forward because you don't have the same personal connection except the new connection you're creating? Or is it such a relief to be like, oh my God, I'm free of all this actual factual stuff. Now I just need to understand the science that makes my science fiction novel work?
Yeah. So that is such a fantastic question. And I think my choice, it's shaping into a funny science fiction middle grade novel. And I think part of that decision was informed by I needed an emotional break. I did not want to jump into another heavy topic, contemporary or historical. So I kept it, light-ish. And I also needed a break from the extensive research. That's not to say science fiction is without its research, but it's a different kind of research than, spending the day at the New York Picture Collection Library looking at wallpaper, right? It's just not the same kind of framework.
No, there's no such thing as a book where you don't have to do research. I
Right.
joke that I have a plausible working theory about how you could create alligator people. I have given this a lot of thought.
I'll look forward to reading about that.
I've got their society all mapped out in my head. I know what's going on with them. You're not going to read all of it on the page because you don't need all of it. But I did the research. I have thoughts. If alligator people existed, I've got some theories on how they'd be. So with them, do you have a plan for yourself, a vision for yourself of who Jennifer Voigt Kaplan, author, is going to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Or are you just kind of playing it by ear that this sounds like a fun project for now and this one might be good? How are you planning? How are you mapping that out?
Well, I guess a little bit of everything. I do. I like children's literature at this point, and I can't imagine in the near future stepping away from that. I still write picture books, and I love writing novels. I have as I just mentioned, I'm just wrapping up one science fiction middle grade novel, and I have an idea for a new middle grade novel. Maybe as my kids get a little older, I wonder if I'll have more of an interest in writing YA, just because I'll be closer to it. Maybe not. I think middle grade, there's something about picture books and middle grade, which I find very, very special, especially the middle grade years. It's really when human beings are becoming the people of their, becoming people, defining their ethics, becoming who they will be in the future. And I find that just very special.
So do you foresee yourself being predominantly middle grade and young adult focus going forward, or do you have some idea in the back of your mind for eventually, once I've lowered their defenses and they've come to trust me as a middle grade person, that's when I hit them with the adult horror?
That's funny. I wonder, I don't know how transferable, if I become a prolific middle grade author, I don't know how transferable those skills would be to the, an adult fiction audience. I hear it's, not quite so easy. And I have plenty of stories that are not children's stories. So I might, if I do want to write something adult one day, it would probably be in the form of a short story to start. But I can't see myself writing an adult novel anytime soon.
Mir Bartok, previous guest, a few episodes back, esteemed audience, said something that I really have been thinking about since, and that was that every novel you write trains you how to write that novel. So you haven't learned how to write novels, you've learned how to write that novel. Now, next novel, you need to learn how to write this novel.
That's fair. I'd agree with that.
I just like that idea that you could do anything. You just might have to really stretch, but you're going to have to do that anyway, even if you write nothing but additional middle grade science fiction books forever.
Right, you're right.
I don't know if you've got like I don't know, I think I've talked about this before. And one of my bucket list items is to eventually have written something in every genre, just to try it out, whether I publish it or not. Like I've got an unpublished Western that the world is better off not reading at this point. But I know I wrote it. I had the fun of doing it.
That's fun. Okay. It goes back to seeking joy. If it makes you happy, that's wonderful. That's what it's about.
Check that one off, and maybe one of these days, under an actual secret pen name, I'll write a romance. I think that might be a fun thing to do as well.
Oh my goodness!
And then we'll get them all. Maybe I'll do a memoir. It'll be fun.
All right then.
And I did want to ask you a little bit about your author website, because I spend a lot of time going to author websites, and I thought yours was extremely well put together. You've got information, you've got downloadable information about the book, information about you. How much time did you spend on that? And first of all, what is your website so people can check it out while they're listening to us?
Okay, www.jennifervk, that's V as in Voigt, K as in Kaplan.com. JenniferVK.com.
JenniferVK.com. So when did you started that after you got the contract? Did I hear that right? Or had you started it before?
Well, I did have a skeleton of one put up before the contract. There's some amazing website builders available nowadays that are easy and look great. And so quite a few years ago, I went to Wix, just found a template, just had something up there, the name of the book, the words that it earned, and a bio, because I wanted to, as I was submitting to agents, I wanted to point them somewhere if they wanted more information about me. But it was not well thought out. It was just sort of the skeleton of something. Once I received the contract, I decided to really commit to building a proper website, and I wanted to do it from scratch. I did look into some of these website builders. I couldn't quite find anything that worked specifically for me, number one. And number two, and this is again like something I'm teaching myself all about now, I'm interested in SEO, search engine optimization, especially for a topic like, the Hitler Youth, the Hitler Jungvolk, and Kristallnacht. And, I would like, as part of my website, what I did was I created educational resources about these topics in the hopes that, children and people would use my website for education. So with these website builders, it was confusing to me how SEO worked. And I just decided I wasn't quite sure. I didn't love the designs that I was seeing, and I just wanted to build something from scratch. So I searched around, looked at a million different author websites, and I kind of plucked out the stuff that worked and didn't work, or what I wanted to mimic, what I didn't want to mimic. And I just had this big idea. Then we're fortunate, and we live in an age where we have all these resources available to us. I went to a website called Upwork.com, and from scratch, I just found a developer who was in my price range and who had some experience in what I needed. And I hired her to build the website, and I wireframed out my vision. I submitted the vision to her, and she built it for me.
That's fantastic. So it looks professionally designed because it is. That answers that question.
Thank you. That was a big project. That took a few months to do.
And then you've got your newsletter there as well. And so my question, because I've got a newsletter, you can subscribe now, esteemed audience, but I'm always trying to figure out what to do with it, how to use it. So how do you anticipate making use of your newsletter?
Well, I'm figuring that all out right now. So, I have some social media pages. I have the newsletter. I start any kind of freebie or giveaway. I'd like to announce it, you know, through those sources. Any kind of new projects or new awards, I can shoot out a blast as well.
Gotcha. So you've got it set, and hopefully you'll be building that audience that's going to follow you through the next book and the next book and then on forever.
Yeah. And that was another thing I did as I was building my website. I built it around this project, this historical fiction novel. But at the time, I knew I was in the middle of writing a funny sci-fi story. So I needed to build a website that could accommodate future projects. And so in my head, I have a vision on how to do this.
So it's in your head. We're not able to know, or how do you do that? What
I plan to do. So one thing is I like the look of a slider. The thing when you land on a home page, it kind of there's a huge graphic, and after a second or two, it slides to another and another. And I've seen some authors who have multiple books. They have their books rotating through, and then you can click on what you want, and will take you to a dedicated page about that specific novel. So that's roughly how I want to structure my website, hopefully when I have more projects to promote.
Which will be soon and very soon. I can feel it.
Oh, thank you.
And then, out of curiosity, you had originally majored in marketing, and then I know you got your master's as well, and you came to picture books later.
Yeah.
Was that when you knew you wanted to be a writer? Or did you have a different vision for yourself initially?
Oh my goodness. Well, this is a big conversation, so feel free to cut me off.
No, you're good. We like big conversations.
I do not have a traditional background in writing at all. So I was born in Germany. I came here when I was to the U.S. When I was about 3.5 or 4. And I went to a Solomon Schechter schools, which are Hebrew schools, where I learned Hebrew. So when, for the first 3 or 4 years of my life, I think I learned a muddle of English and German. And then I learned, when I first came here for a number of years, I learned Hebrew and English. So by the time I got to 2nd grade in the public schools of Philadelphia, I was behind in language, and I struggled with language. Also, I spent a good amount of time with my grandparents, who are German immigrants, and anybody who grew up with grandparents who are any kind of immigrants, knows English is not spoken properly in the house. So my ear for the language was completely off. And I sort of, I found my way after a couple of years in school, but I was, I guess, insecure about my, language ability. I was also happened to be okay at math. So they pushed me, the educators kind of, celebrated that and pushed me in a certain direction. So by the time I graduated from high school, I said, oh, no, language, not my thing. This is what I've been told. This is what I experienced. I'm not going to do anything in language. I have to pursue something in math. That's in my head. That's, how I evolved to that. Meanwhile, I remember in 11th grade, I took an English course. And there was a bunch of creative writing. There was a bunch of, analysis of fiction. And I loved it. I almost had to say, okay, stay focused. Don't have this love. But I remember it sort of planted a seed for me. Then I went on and I, studied business as an undergraduate. And then as a young adult, my first job was as a management consultant with Deloitte Consulting. And I remember all this time, I felt a little bit of a creative void where I just liked, the idea of painting, even though I'm a terrible painter, or I like the idea of crafting, even though I'm not a particularly good crafter. I would receive a joy from that, a creative joy when I engaged in these kinds of activities. The problem if you're a busy young professional is you don't have time, to take a painting class, to get supplies. It's not as accessible. So I remember when I was 22, after a long day at work, I said, why don't I just start puttering around and writing stories? I've never considered this or done this, but, I love literature. And I was, just after work, even it was awful, just awful. But I would do it and it would give me joy. So that planted another seed, and life went on. And I had a few, we had a family and I had a few different career changes. And it really wasn't until my children were of a young age where, picture books was just a part of our daily life. And, I've always had so many creative ideas. I said, this is accessible. I could sit in a computer and craft a story. I can't really get out my sewing machine with my toddler, running around, but this is accessible. And I would putter around on the keyboard and it would give me joy. And that's how I kind of backed into writing. It was all about joy and creative fulfillment.
And have you always been a big reader?
Probably when I got a little bit better of a command of English, probably in high school, it started to explode for me. But early on, not so much.
So I'm curious, with that insecurity that you had about language, do you feel that ultimately that's helped you because you worked so hard to overcompensate for that initial insecurity, that you're now far beyond where you might have been if you'd always felt that, I got it, I don't need to worry about language?
Well, I don't know if I'll be, far beyond. You can be the judge of that. But I do think it has helped me. So when I was growing up, because I struggled with language, I just couldn't find books that were suitable for me, not just with language, but with content. I wanted a good story with big problems. I feel like the options for children nowadays are fantastic. And I think I probably would have found my way, had the literature that's available now been available when I was growing up. I wonder if my path would have been a little bit different. But at the time, I felt like I need a better plot. I need, a juicy story. I need problems. I need conflicted characters. I need all that stuff at a level that I can digest. And so when I, plot out and I write for children, I always had that in mind. I always would I think about the reluctant reader as I'm writing, and I write for them.
How does that inform your writing in specific ways to hook those reluctant readers and get them involved?
It's really fleshing out the plot twists and the problems and the characterization and, the nuances of the character. I think it's all of that, making characters meaningful and believable and relatable, and lots of good plot stuff in there.
Gotcha. I didn't know if there was something like where you'd look at it as sentence by sentence level and say, nope, that's too much for my reluctant reader. Let me fix that. Or is it just more overall trying to keep those twists, trying to make sure that they're never putting the book down?
Yeah, I guess it's a little of both.
And Jennifer Voigt Kaplan, have you ever seen a flying saucer, and do you believe in them?
I don't not believe in them. I guess I believe in the possibility of anything. I suppose I have seen someone throw a saucer, but that's not a flying saucer.
Well, I was hoping that in researching the science fiction book, maybe you had uncovered some truth that you could share with us.
Oh, unfortunately not about flying saucers. My book is about alternate universes.
Are alternate universes a thing, you think?
I don't not believe in anything. I believe in the possibility of many things.
Fair enough. And here's kind of a lazy question that I've decided to start throwing out there because it catches things that I don't know to ask otherwise. Some of my favorite answers to questions are things I never would have in a million years been able to find on social media or in a book to ask you about. What's the most interesting thing that's happened to you?
What's the most interesting thing that's happened to me?
Yes, ma'am.
Today? This interview.
What's so far your life to date?
Well, where should I start? I suppose one time I was attacked by wild turkeys. That's kind of interesting.
Oh, how did that come to pass?
Well, rather ordinarily. I was driving, so I must have been about 17 or 18. I was parked at a light. There were woods to my left. And all of a sudden, a wild, very surly turkey, there may have been two of them, popped their heads out, looked at me. I said, wow, that's something. And then they made eye contact, and they started running for my car, squawking or whatever sound they make, with the intent to attack. And so this is quite a few years ago. And nowadays you have the automatic windows where you could just, press a button and they shoot up rather quickly. I had a car with the old-fashioned crank. So I had maybe about 4 seconds before the aggressive wild turkeys got to me. And I'm just cranking very quickly. And sure enough, they did get to me, and they started pecking the heck out of my window.
If it were a horror movie, they would have reached you just as you were almost cracked up, and then there'd be a beak just poking through into the car.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I'm still waiting for a good opportunity to add that into one of my books.
Were you eating a turkey sandwich at the time, or had you done something to provoke them?
That's so funny. Hey, I was the victim. I didn't do anything in the situation.
I suppose that's literally a question along the way. You know what? Never mind. I'm not gonna follow up that thought. I am gonna ask you this question, and this is my kind of catch-all question, and we'll end on this. If there was one or two or however many bits of advice you like that you could go back and give to younger you as you're starting your writing journey, that would have made a significant difference for all the writers who are listening, that might still make a difference for them, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Well, I don't know if my situation is so typical for most career writers, but, I would just say be open-minded. I did have glimmers of joy with fiction as a younger person, and I pushed them out because I wanted to stay on track for what I was told that I should stay on track to do. So if I were a little bit open-minded, if I just broadened my horizons a little bit, I wonder if it would have propelled me earlier or in a different way, or my skill would have developed in a different way. Mind you, I have no regrets. I love how this has all played out. I love, given my situation growing up, I feel very good about where I am. And if I feel a deficit in, any particular area where I want to improve my craft, there's, a million wonderful seminars and conferences that I could pursue. So, I suppose for anybody, just as a younger person, just don't be so narrow-minded. And the reverse is true. If you, see yourself only as, an English person, but yet, you did have fun with that logic puzzle, and what's up with that? Indulge it. Just indulge it. Any little glimmer of interest, even if it isn't compatible with your identity at the time, go with it and see where it takes you.
Makes a lot of sense to me, and it's a great note to end on. Jennifer, remind esteemed audience of your website and where they can find you online.
Okay. Well, my book, once again, it's called Crushing the Red Flowers.
Available wherever fine books are sold at this moment. Go pick up your copy, esteemed audience.
And my website is www.jennifervk.com. That's V as in Victor, K as in Kaplan, jennifervk.com. I have a Instagram author page and a Facebook author page, Jennifer Voigt Kaplan. So feel free to sign up.
As always, esteemed audience, find out more about me, more about the show at middlegradeninja.com. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. Download your free copy of the Book of David Chapter 1. And make sure you find your way back here next Saturday when I'll be talking with your guest. This is as good as mine, but I bet there'll be a guest that's as fantastic as Jennifer Voigt Kaplan. Jennifer, thanks again for making the time today. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm honored. Thank you for including me.
And I'm asking all of our guests to sign us off with the very ninja-like, totally justifies the name of the show sign-off phrase. And that sign-off phrase is hi-ya and what have you. Will you sign us off?
Yeah. Hiya and what have you.